Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into my podcast, My Time, My Life. Today, I am welcoming a special guest, my friend Javier Ramiro Velazco. He is the founder of the 100% agave mezcal, Bee-shee-do. Founded in 2017 and made in Oaxaca, Mexico, Bixhidú produces 10 expressions of ancestral and artisanal mezcal in small premium batches. Javier works in partnership with local farmers and their agave cultivation, harvesting, roasting, fermentation, and distillation processes, strictly adheres to multi-generational traditions and rich heritage that passionately lives on in the town of Sola de Vega. Before founding Bee-shee-do, Javier earned his undergrad degree in mass communications from Emerson College, where we know each other from. Hey. And he truly believes in the school's philosophy that expression is necessary to evolution. He then went on to earn his master's in post-colonial English literature from Cal State LA. After graduate school, Javier worked in the TV and film business for almost a decade and ultimately found his purpose through teaching English to Black and Brown students, which he's been doing for 2 decades now. Teaching brings him stability, provides an intellectual challenge, and is a vessel for empathy and social justice. Javier divides his time between Los Angeles, where he teaches, and Mexico, where he creates his mezcal. Thank you so much for joining my podcast today, Javier.
Jeanette, it's always a pleasure to see you. Long time.
Yes. You have such a fascinating story, and I really love that you reconnect your Mexican roots through your brand, Bee-shee-do, and that you bring such passion to your students in your classroom. Let's hop on in here. So, tell us why you decided to create a new mezcal brand, and what did you think was missing from the market?
Every time I went out, I fell in love with mezcal about 20 years ago. And I remember that instance where I got lost on the road to Puerto Escondido, or the beach towns where all the tourists hang out. So I got stuck about 7 hours away from that in the high mountains of Oaxaca. And, being who I am, I decided to take the road less traveled. And I went into a little hillside town, and I went into a palenque, or a small factory, and I tasted what to this day remains the purpose for mezcal, making something absolutely organic, of the earth, that captures both the heritage, but above all, the passion of each individual mezcal maker. And when I came back to the U.S., unfortunately, that flavor profile, that aroma, and that experience was nowhere to be found. And I said, I want to recreate that experience all the time, if for nobody else, for myself. And that was part of the reason that I decided to engage in this venture as a mezcal maker.
That is amazing. And had you always had a vision for it before that incident? And if so, how did you manifest this?
I don't think it was a vision necessarily for mezcal, but since I was in college, I used to hang out with my buddy, Jorge, in the dorm room, and we would sketch out images, skits, book ideas, and the one thing that they all had in common was this longing, this nostalgia for a culture that we had left behind. And there was always such images of Mexico, whether it's song, dance, food, the way that we speak, the regions, etc. We had a 2-person show in that dorm room for years, and it's manifested through many of the creative endeavors I've had, whether it's putting together cultural events, pairing foods with drinks, and finally, through this particular venture, making mezcal, perhaps a coming together of all those goals to express culture.
Excellent. And which dorm at Emerson was this manifestation happening?
Of course, it was the one with ghosts, Charlesgate. On the 8th floor, overlooking the lake, or the river, the Charles River. And we'd hang out
Charlesgate.
Yeah. And it was a wonderful time to be young. And, college for me was a lot about taking, the long breath from family and space that we needed to intellectually grow. And in my case, I think the creative spirits really kind of meshed. And I think I've been living off those spirits for a very long time.
Right. There's no better place than Emerson to really do something creative. That's awesome. How did you go about finding the farmers that you work with and the land on which to produce the agave?
Initially, on one of those trips that I made down there, I started to stray away from the tourist areas, and I ended up always going back to that little town called Sola de Vega. And on one of them, we got an invitation from a woman here who lives in Los Angeles. She's a doctor, an alternative medicine doctor. And she once brought some mezcal, and it was that flavor. It was that flavor that I had longed for, herbal, fresh, organic. And she said, if ever you want to taste this, when you go down to Oaxaca, find my brother. Her brother turned out to be an architect, an engineer who had long ago given up that world of public service and instead decided to become the foremost grower in one particular species of agave called tobala. And he went to this little town and he taught the people how to grow these plants using a system that actually goes back to our indigenous heritage, the way the Aztecs gave water, or doing a scaled system of irrigation. And he crafted the largest harvest of tobala. So the man became renowned for that agave species, and he became my friend. And when I go visit him, he also enjoyed smoking some weed, and he was just a man of books, and he loved films. I would call a Renaissance man. So I kept going back over and over. And then one day he said to me, hey, why don't you jump on board and stop coming down here and taking our mezcal? So I did. 1 minute to the next, I was deeply involved in a project where we had 1,000 bottles with no plan on how to sell it, because we had no certification, we had no branding, we had nothing. We just had 1,000 bottles of the most amazing mezcal, and thus Bee-shee-do was born.
Wow. You have a lot more than 1,000 now.
We got thousands. We have 10,000. So, and then unfortunately, the year after we purchased those 1,000 bottles, Luis Mendez was the gentleman's name. He had a heart attack and he died on his farm. And of course, we had no idea what we were going to do with this. And that prolonged our bringing it over stateside. But it also kind of allowed us to begin to meet the characters or the people that are now the dominant factors in our processing. We found out that the people that made the mezcal for him were indeed the local farmers. And he had all these connections and relationships with them. So out of the woodwork, they all started coming out. And they would find me down the street. They would find me on the farm. They would find me everywhere. And they're like, hello, I'm Naum, or I'm Gerardo, and I used to work with Luis Mendez, and we would love to work with you. And next thing you know, I started forming these bonds, going to their quinceañeras and their baptisms, and they started inviting me to many events until we formed these relationships that have now gone on for almost 8-9 years.
Wow. I talked about that, forming relationships in one of my previous podcasts, and how important it is, especially when you're traveling, could be a bit out of your comfort zone or whatever, to be open to conversations with people and to actually try to form relationships, because you just don't know. And had you not have the personality and the spirit to do that and to be welcoming to people and stuff, like, perhaps you wouldn't be here doing your brand today. So that's incredible.
Yeah. And it wasn't an easy journey. I mean, mind you, I walked into this town renowned for a little bit of the dark side. There's some violence in Mexico, and in this particular place, it's not violence, let's say, against the government or narcos, but it's town to town that are fighting over land rights for over 100 years. And these skirmishes, rise up at any given moment. So a lot of the men are very skeptical about newcomers. Who are you? What are you doing here? And they walk around with what I call a Charles Bronson, Clint Eastwood, little drawl, and they got black hats like this one, and they walk around with machetes. So if you can imagine that scene, right? Walking in as an LA guy, they smelled my extranjero or tourist vibe. But, luckily I've been blessed enough to form strong relationships where people all over town now know me. And I'm not just an outsider. I'm just someone who comes in and, hangs out and does my thing. And for the most part, the relationships have only strengthened over the years.
Right. Incredible. So I know that you're a teacher as well. So you teach English, is that correct?
I teach many types of English. I teach, my favorite is the newcomers. So I have students from all over the world right now. We're inundated, of course, with Ukrainians, Georgians, Russians, all in one classroom now. Of course, all of them fleeing the conflicts. And then we have a lot of economic refugees, war refugees from Africa. And then we have Central Americans from Guatemala and Salvador, Honduras, that are part of our system. And they are the ones that I think I've developed the strongest relationships with.
Mm,
And then my other group are my really, really fortunate kids, my AP students. I teach a seminar
mm-hmm,
class that focuses on college level research and critical thinking. We look at
mm-hmm.
things from multiple lenses and perspectives to isolate global issues, local issues, and try to form solutions to these problems. And working with those kids, I think from both sides, the newcomers and the AP kids, both creates a challenge for me in terms of how do I go about planning my day to engage students on vastly different intellectual depths, but also how do I
Yeah.
find the empathy to engage both of them equally, really targeting their needs and their specific, I guess, objectives as students.
Is there anything that your students teach you in the classroom that you apply to your entrepreneurship?
I think the number one thing that my students teach me is what sometimes feels like an absolute emergency or end of the world
Mm-hmm.
event is often not that big. And I'm learning
Yeah.
to recognize that if we tackle the problems that we face, and if we're not afraid to face the issues that we're facing and the people involved, and if we're willing to unearth and dig deeper to find the deepest issue that's creating these feelings of irritation, these feelings of uncertainty, the feelings of fear, if we tackle it straight on, we're likely to begin to diminish it and find solutions. Whereas opposed to putting it aside, tossing it aside, or simply neglecting the issue will often compound it.
Wow. Yes, that is, those are lessons that it would be very helpful if most business managers took into account every day during the course of a normal workday,
Yes,
you
yeah.
know?
And I've also
And
learned the authoritarian perspective or approach to things will never work.
right,
You want to build friendships, bonds, but above all, you want to build trust, not
right,
authority.
right. And that's exactly what you've done in building your brand. Exactly. How do you balance your entrepreneurship with being a teacher? I mean, I imagine both of those disciplines are very time consuming, and just puts a lot of, I guess, pressure on you. So how do you go up on that, and how do you take care of yourself in that process?
I'm very lucky. I'm blessed with a wonderful company of my girlfriend Wendy, who really drives home the point of take care of yourself, take care of yourself. Sleep well, drink a lot of water, stretch. I'm about to turn 50 years old, and more than ever, the physical balance with the spiritual aspect of who we are is absolutely an integral aspect of trying to do the kind of things that we do in this particular millennium, where our endless energy is of the spirit, not always of the body. So we have to make sure that both balance out. I probably eat more salads than ever, and I try to
Hmm.
sleep as much as
Same.
possible, drink water, but above all, planning. Recognizing while I'm at work, I stay present to my students, and I don't think about
Yeah.
work. I don't think about mezcal. But the minute I leave, I let go of my work. Whatever those issues were that occurred during the day, it's the past. I focus absolutely present on, meeting clients, developing our product, making sure that social media is happening, doing tastings, everything that I need, that I know I have to do to gradually build and build and build and expose the greatness of our brand. It's about being
All
present.
right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And what is your key marketing strategy that you adopt?
I think right now what I did is I'm focusing on LA. I'm focusing on the
Mm-hmm.
major markets,
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that LA is probably a godsend for me because it's booming at a time when people have already done a lot of the work. Other brands have introduced mezcal.
Yep.
A lot of clients and people in general are more aware of the distinction between a industrial mezcal, a regular mezcal, and a premium mezcal. And they've done so much of the work that when I come in, I don't have to do very much except pour and let them sip, and they recognize that indeed it's a special elixir, it's a special spirit. So my marketing is targeted towards those companies, those restaurants, those that already have something established in terms of mezcal consumption.
Yes. And for the novices out there, and I admit I was one before I tasted your brand, what is the difference between tequila and mezcal? Are they commonly confused?
Yeah, so the biggest difference is simple. It's just a question of diversity. Mezcal, for the most part, is made with a variety of agaves. Right now, probably more than 40 agaves are being used from Oaxaca to Mexico. Whereas tequila, the ones that are ethically doing things, are using one agave, which is the Blue Weber agave. And so all that does, it creates a particular flavor profile, and it's one. And then the other big difference is, of course, naming rights. So tequila was, the industry of tequila was brilliant in doing much what champagne and other spirits have done, is they have limited their denomination of origin to a particular region. So therefore, that only those spirits made in Jalisco, Guadalajara, and a few other states are able to be called tequila. And mezcal is now only able to be used by those 7 states that have been given government right to be able to call it via heritage or proving that you have a tradition for making the spirit. And again, only those 7 states, it might be 9 soon, that have that denomination of origin can be called mezcal. The other big difference, I think, might be in that many traditional tequila makers are usually big in terms of production, and most mezcal production is still small, family made. At least in the better brands. But with this booming industry, I think we're going to start to see larger companies start to come on board.
Yeah. And tell me, what is the best mezcal cocktail recipe? If tequila will own a margarita, what do you say about mezcal?
Well, I think you can't.
I need to know what to order the next time I'm out.
One thing that I see as a trend out there is that if you love an old fashioned, try a mezcal old fashioned. If you love a Negroni, try a mezcal Negroni. Anything that you loved, put mezcal in it. It'll be that much better. Not to mention the next day you won't get that headache. The 100%, the 100% organic nature of agave makes your body break down these sugars. This is data. This is science. A lot easier than the other spirits.
Huh. So would you say mezcal is more complex since it is a variety of agave, if tequila is just like one agave?
Far more complex. It's a given. It's a fact. For all of you foodies and aroma people out there that love complexity of flavors and aromas, mezcal can be anything from floral, citrus, spice forward. It can be rich in minerality. It can remind you of cotton candy. It can remind you of a day at the park, a walk in the woods, a rainy day. That's what the agaves have, because you are tasting the terroir. You're tasting the land of each particular region that's making this particular mezcal. And it's their plants and it's the soil that you are tasting.
I need a bottle of Bee-shee-do here right now. Javier. Stat. Speaking of which, do you ship? How can people listening, not in LA, get their hands on your product?
We've just recently put our mezcal in a boutique spirit store here in LA in Highland Park, and hopefully one in Studio City very soon, which will allow for shipping nationwide.
All right. Okay. Well, please keep me posted on that. I would be happy to promote that once that is ready to go.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Wanted to also ask, where did you find the confidence to create your brand? And I'm sorry, where did you find the confidence to take a risk to create the brand, because we all know that anything dealing with entrepreneurship, no matter what kind, you have to be overly confident to even attempt to do it, really.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's even confidence. I remember in high school, I ran for student office, and I didn't really know anybody. And one of my teachers thought that I had good leadership qualities. And, for the most part, our school was run by a small percentage. I like to call it was South Africa Light, where a certain group of kids, or the white kids who were bused in, pretty much ran our school of 90% Black and Hispanic kids. And I remember thinking about that. I'm like, there's something wrong with that picture. And I decided to question the system. And first I began becoming editor of our school newspaper, which was run entirely by the white kids. And then the yearbook, I got involved in that. And finally I said, you know what? I'm going to take a stab at the student office. And I armed a campaign that was quite controversial, and I won. And I kind of did it out of naivete, but I knew the spirit there was, one, to be involved in a system that is usually run by privileged, or at least by people that have the means to do it. And I think I did that. I've done that throughout my life. I tried to make a small film in Mexico, and it was the same thing, going up against a system where the government usually gives you the money, and it's often for the few and the privileged. I tried to I did start we call it a music and food and entertainment company that we lasted for 10 years. And in a city that's run by entertainment, there was often a lack for our people, for Latin people, Latin events, Black people events. And I started doing that, often again with the spirit of giving access to those that often don't have access, or aren't involved, or aren't taken into account in our society. And then I think teaching was a part of that, taking that risk of trying to, seek social justice, and not just sitting around complaining about it, but, being an active participant in making changes, and choosing to work at a school that had a great need for equity. And I think mezcal is a part of that. There's no doubt that there's massive conglomerates and companies and influencers and people of influence that are starting their brands with everything already at hand. And as a Mexican person, I think that it's my responsibility to try to promote this particular spirit from the spirit of Mexico, not from the outside in.
Amazing. And this is why we're friends. I'll just throw that in there.
And above all, I'm a little bit of a wild man. Sometimes I just jump into things without even thinking about it. They've not always ended up well. I'll talk about my real estate ventures at a different time.
It's all a journey, right? And it all leads you to where you are. So no regrets at all. Has this been a fulfilling journey for you?
They used to call me Mr. Hollywood in San Diego, where I grew up, because I was always in Hollywood events and gatherings, and I lived in LA, which was a big no-no in San Diego. And then I remember even in college, my dorm room was the social center, and we would hang out there and be college kids. And then later on, throughout my life, my home has always been a center for gatherings. But something happened along the way when I started engaging in the mezcal business. I no longer became the center, but it was rather the spirit of the mezcal that became the center. It was the stories of the people, the folklore of Mexico, the myths, all of the things that encompass the spirit became the hosts for these gatherings. And for 5 to 7 years now, I have been coming to people's homes. We get invited. We do collaborations with chefs, with artists. We throw major parties now. And it's no longer about me and my social needs. It's about the spirit and the nature and the history of the people of Oaxaca that are really the hosts. And I'm just a vessel for promoting that. And I think
that's so powerful.
Yeah, there's a purpose now that's beyond me, it's bigger than me. And I think that it's beautiful, and it satisfies my social needs for someone my age. I go in there for a little while, and then I go to get my sleep.
We all need our rest in our 50s.
Yes. That's it.
My last question that I have for you, Javier, what have been the two biggest risks that you've taken in your life, and how did they pay off, assuming that they did?
Um, one was not really my choice. It was a risk taken by others. When I
Mm-hmm.
was a kid, I grew up in Mexico for a few years, and my family sent me to San Diego to get an education. And it was supposed to be short lived, sixth grade, and then return to Mexico. But when they asked me if I wanted to return, my young self, for whatever reason, had the foresight, that Mexico was not a place where I would be able to best, I guess, live a life of creativity and opportunity. And
Mm-hmm.
I decided to stay, and thus my life evolved in the United States. And it was a risk, and not without consequences. The distance between family, all the emotional issues that come with that, the growing distance, a distance from home, culture, country. So those were major risks, which I wasn't aware of until later on in my life. I recognized the need to mend that. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but overall, I have to say the risk was worthwhile. And I guess the second one was becoming a teacher. I had worked in Hollywood and the entertainment business for a long time, and I pretty much wore out uh, that that need for that world, and I was fatigued, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And I realized it was
Mm-hmm.
because I was draining myself. It was all self-centered, and taking the risk to become a teacher, to get out there and become part of the community or a community, I think was one of the greatest risks because it took away that energy from myself and allowed me to pour it into these young human beings, into a system of education that is often neglected, or places that are neglected. The
Mm-hmm.
risk has definitely been satisfying. The risk has been worthwhile, and above all, it's filled me with purpose.
I can't think of a better note to end on, Javier. Thank you so, so much for taking time out of your very busy schedule to do this today. I really, really appreciate it.
Trinette, I can see the beautiful dog in the back.
That's her, for those of you who can't see this, who are listening, that's Avery's Warhol. And I'll just say I did not make that. An old friend in New York made that for one of her birthday gifts. So yeah, that was before she got all her gray hair.
Yeah. I believe there's a picture with Avery drinking a little mezcal. I remember.
Yes, she probably drank a lot of mezcal.
As we say in Oaxaca, salud.
Salud. Thank you, my friend. Tune in to the next episode of My Time, My Life. Take care. Bye.
Adios.